Welcome to Off Code, the show where we ignore the cultural codes and have real and intriguing conversations regarding the Black community and ways we can move forward to human flourishing.
Hello and welcome to Off Code. I am Monique Duson.
And I am Kevin Briggins, and we have another great episode for you all today. I think this may be the most important episode we've ever done. We've tackled some big topics, but I think this is one that a lot of people need to hear, and I think it's going to benefit people in a great way. So I'm excited.
I think you're right. We're going to be talking about Blacks and racial violence. So looking at, how are Black people participating in racial violence? Are we participating in racial violence? And then looking at the other side of that, in police brutality, police violence, what are the rates and statistics of police brutality on Black lives? So Today we have Eric Muldrow from Code Red Conversations with us to be able to help thread through some of that. We're going to look at some of the myths and what are some of the truths that are out there that are not being talked about. I think that coming off of the conversation on systemic racism, I think this is just a good segue into this, Kevin, because most people who uphold the idea of systemic racism and police brutality and that, the policing system or the judicial system is just systemically racist would say that, Black bodies are being plucked off and that, Blacks are just targeted and that this is an entirely systemic issue. And so hopefully we can get some clarity into, what all of this is. Is it a systemic issue? Is it not? And Eric is the person to talk to. We gonna have to be serious because the three of us together,
it's already been bad.
It's already been bad. We've been on here for 45 minutes already. Oh, goodness gracious. So let's go ahead and bring Eric in. Hello.
Hey, what's going on, y'all?
What's good, man?
Not much today. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. We are looking forward to this conversation. And so, first of all, just tell all of our viewers and listeners, who are you? What are you up to? Tell us about your channel and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm as was already mentioned, I'm Eric Muldrow. I am a retired law enforcement officer with over 20 years of experience. My experience basically starts from the end of 1992, where I began working as a corrections officer with the Indiana Department of Corrections. There's an article that went around back in the day, and this is around 94 or so, when I was working at the prison in Westville Correctional Center, Westville, Indiana. And the article from I can't remember the name of the newspaper, but it was titled Living Hell at Westville. And it gave the story of a inmate whose uncle or father was a politician. And he talked about the utter violence and insanity that he went through while he was working there. That was a prison that I worked at for about 3 years. So I cut my teeth in law enforcement there after getting out of the Army. In 1995, I moved my family out to Las Vegas, and in 96, I hired on with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, worked at the Clark County Detention Center, the county jail, for 10 years. In 2006, I decided I needed a change, so I transferred out to the patrol side of the house, where I began working as a police officer on the streets, driving a black and white, and I did that all the way up until 2014. Over the last few years, in light of all the controversy related to law enforcement and police, allegations of police brutality and actual police brutality, I started getting involved in the conversation, having discussions on social media. Had a few opportunities to speak on a few podcasts and a few radio shows, which led me to ultimately founding Code Red Conversations right here on my YouTube channel. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm probably most active on YouTube, where I discuss issues related. The channel's broadened a bit more, where I discuss a lot of conservative issues from a Christian perspective, or a lot of cultural issues from a Christian perspective. But at the heart of Code Red Conversations is addressing issues related to law enforcement and helping us understand these biblically, and understanding these just common sense, and even helping people work their way through the more difficult events that may take place that may not be as cut and dry as, oh, that was totally fine. So I use my experience as a firearms instructor, active shooter response instructor, defensive tactics instructor, terrorism liaison officer. I use all that experience that I gained over the years to help the average everyday citizen understand why cops do a lot of what they do.
Man, that's good, Eric. And I mean, I consider you you are a subject matter expert to the definition of the word, right? Just based on your experience and this topic that comes up so often in our culture because of certain high profile shootings, that the average person doesn't have your level of experience to understand kind of the details to what to really look for and understand what that officer is going through in that situation.
Right.
So from your perspective, kind of tell us what is like the biggest misconception you think is out there that people have about police officers and police shootings and brutality and all of that stuff. What is the biggest misconception you think is out there?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty much what we were discussing off air was the assumption that cops are out there hunting Black people down. As LeBron James famously said a few years ago, they're hunting us down in the street. We can't go anywhere. That is ridiculous. That is the only way to put it. And I was watching a little bit of your previous video y'all did, y'all being all nice and stuff like that. I may not be so nice when it comes down to some of these issues because there's so much foolishness out there. And when you see it over and over again, and you know that there is an agenda behind it, it just be pissing the brother off. So I may not necessarily be, all sweet and cuddly. I try, I want to be, I want to honor the Lord. I ain't trying to get ignorant, up here, but I might have to.
Look, you see Monique's shirt. We have to do that so Monique don't go off because we have to keep her in check. If we start going there, ain't no telling where this show will go.
I definitely, it's a hard work trying to keep it all the way together. But if you go, I am willing to travel that road with you.
Okay.
Somebody got to do it, and I'm here for you.
I appreciate that, my sister.
I do, but I think you're on, like you're spot on. It's like we have to address the buffoonery that is out there, and it's like you feel like you can't walk outside your house because you're being hunted, but you like 12 feet tall, and not to even say that your height is gonna stop a bullet, but like you say this behind cameras, you say this behind your fenced-in property, you say this behind your bodyguards. Like, where are they plucking you off at? Because the last time I was looking at the people who were being shot by police, they wasn't sitting up in the mansions.
Yeah. I think a lot of this is going to come back down to, and we're going to talk about it, the emotionalism, right?
Yes.
It's not that it's necessarily rooted in the truth. They have made it to where it plays to our emotions, and to where even a billionaire like LeBron James, who lives the most privileged and best life you can ever think of, feels this way.
Right.
That's a powerful, powerful tool. But we're going to dive into what are the numbers? What's the reality? And just look at this thing and say, okay, what's really going on?
But let's look at 2019. That's when I put together my police brutality separating fact from fiction presentation. And in 2019, according to the Washington Post, the police killed 999 people. And typically, when people hear those numbers, they're like appalled. Like, what are you talking about? And that number can be shocking to the average everyday person. I get it. But I always tell people, you have to look at this whole situation from a top down, like a 50,000 feet perspective, so you can understand what's going on. There's been research over the years that demonstrates that the police make somewhere in the neighborhood of over 300 million contacts with the public every year. And that's self-initiated stops, calls for service, vehicle stops, person stops, whatever they may be. So you're looking at 300 million contacts with the public the police make every year. So, and there's somewhere in the neighborhood. Let me look at my numbers here. I think the number is maybe 500,000 to, the number is assumed 500,000 to around 2 million police officers in the United States. So if you look at that number of officers making that many interactions with the public, it kind of frames the number, it makes it look a little different. It helps us understand that it's really not as bad as people try to make it out to be, that the police are out there running and gunning and shooting and killing everybody. Now, if you'd say back 50 years ago, back in the 60s and 70s, there was an argument to be made that the cops were out there killing up folks, not left and right, but at a dramatically higher rate than it goes down these days. So when you look at it like that, when you see how many contacts the police make, understanding that they kill roughly 1,000 people every year, and yes, there are criminals out there. There are people out there who murder thousands. I think in 2022, 2021, somewhere around there might have been around 17,000 murders in the United States total. So if you figure how many people are out there committing violent acts to where when they come in contact with law enforcement, they may not want to cooperate, it makes things a little more feasible, a little easier to understand why the cops may kill to the extent that they do. But when we look at, so if we understand that helps us understand the entire conversation. And again, 2019, 403 of those people, again, according to the Washington Post, 403 of those people that the police killed were white. 250 were Black, 162 Hispanic, 143 were unknown as of when the data came out, and then 41 were other. So when you look at that number right there, you see 250, let's focus on the fact that 250 of them were Black. And then the thing that helps us understand this data even more is that according to the Washington Post, not a newspaper known for being conservative or anything like that, they said that anywhere from 85 to 90% of those shootings, the suspect was in possession of some form of a weapon. 85 to 90% of all of these, the suspect had a weapon, whether they were in a vehicle, uncooperative, putting someone else at risk, a knife, a blunt object, a gun, whatever it may be. So all those factors, you don't typically hear that MSNBC hosts were referencing earlier, and we hopefully will get into as the show progresses. You don't hear them bringing up this information. They say certain terms, they bring up a certain amount of data just to poke and prod and get people angry. You see what they're doing to us? Mm-hmm. This is why this is why I hate the police. This is why I don't trust the police. This is why Black folks run, or they justify running, because they look at how many of us are killing. But yet, okay, well, why did they come in contact with the police in the first place? Why did that officer pull his gun down? Are we waiting for any body cam footage? Of course not. All we have to hear is that there was a Black man with a white cop, and even a cop in general nowadays don't even have to be a white cop. It's just a uniform, and that's all we have to hear. And we're making assumptions left and right. And typically, as time goes on, we get more information. But by then, the damage has been done. It's already been done, and we've already been indoctrinated to believe that these people are out there hunting us down, and we get foolishness like what LeBron James said, and so many other people believe.
And this is why I think having this conversation is important, especially because we're not fully into like election season yet. But when election season comes around, one of the things that some politicians will play on is your skin color and what your skin color means in this nation. And so bearing Black skin, you're a threat. You're going to be, plucked off by the police. We're going to reform. We're going to do this, and that because you're Black. And so that just continues to rile up this conversation of the police are hunting me down. I'm a victim. I'm not going to, be safe if I get pulled over in a police stop and all that. And so We want to have this conversation now to get the data out there, to be ahead of what's coming, because we don't want our emotions to be what drives us. We want to be able to think about things in case you are pulled over or you find yourself in, a place where you're having an interaction with a police officer. You can say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. What are I know my rights. I know, how to navigate situations. I don't need to believe the buffoonery that the media is wanting to send me. And when the media does send you the buffoonery, you can click it off, or you can say, you'll be aware of understanding, like, they're lying. That's not true.
Yep.
So that's what I think my heart is in, especially in a lot of this conversation, and getting ahead of what's come, that storm that's going to come, because the storm is going to come, because somebody is going to be shot by a Black person is going to be shot by a police officer. Like that, we can't prevent that, especially because people have autonomy. And sin is real. So if a sinful person comes across a police officer and takes out his gun to shoot a police officer, and at the end of the day, that police officer is like, I got to get home to my family, and he shoots the Black guy, it's automatically going to be seen as racist, a modern day lynching, getting everybody into their emotions.
Yeah.
We need to be able to think about this.
Even if it's a situation that doesn't look well, let's say the person is unarmed.
Mm-hmm.
They pretend as if that's a normal occurrence, a regular.
Mm-hmm.
I know in 2019, the number of unarmed Black people that were killed by the police was 20. 20 people through the whole nation for the whole year. I know in 2021, the number is down to 11. So 11 unarmed Black people killed by the police. I don't want to hear this is this epidemic of this going on.
Here's the thing, and this is something, and Eric, I know you're going to jump in because you said this when you was on All the Things with us. It's like, let's say you're unarmed technically, and we saw this in, I want to say Atlanta a couple years ago, where that guy was shot in the back. But he had given that police officer a good old beat down. Like, his hands were a weapon. I don't know if we're thinking about the fact that sometimes your hand, you might not have a gun, you might not have a knife or things like that, but your hands themselves. And I know I think it's in Tennessee, there was a white police officer who was actually beaten to death by a Black suspect. And he had his gun. And so I don't know what happened there, but it's like, we can't just not remember that our hands and our feet can also be considered weapons. So just because, it was like 11 or 20 or 9, whatever, Black people didn't have any weapons and they were killed by police, I also wonder, well, let me read the report, because was this person also offering a beatdown? Especially, is this a man who's offering a beatdown on a female police officer?
Absolutely.
You got to think about it. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I would say that that's a factor that is often overlooked. And again, when I was on your other show and we had this conversation, that was one of the points I brought up. Every year, there are like hundreds of people that are killed via bare hands. And which is why I'm such an advocate of them revamping the police academies and giving officers greater combative skills, self-defense, martial arts, defensive tactics, whatever term you want to use, but giving cops greater physical ability and then holding them to a certain standard. Because I think there's a good degree of that responsibility that falls on the individual officer. And I'm not absolving the citizen for their responsibility to not try to fight and resist an officer. I'm not. But if an officer has a low amount of skills, and he gets into a physical altercation with the suspect, he's physically unfit, he can't fight his way out of a wet paper bag, the likelihood that he'll go to deadly force, a higher level of force, increases dramatically. So I think that a lot of agencies, they typically think that, it's going to cost too much money, and or we don't want to be looking like we're teaching these officers how to fight or whatever, but yet you're dealing with the criminal element. You're dealing with people who are out there committing crimes. You get to the point to where you have to use force. In most situations, it's because you have an uncooperative suspect. So give the officer a greater ability to subdue the suspect or the citizen and take them into custody without having to escalate to deadly force. Make a standard. I'm not sure if I want to go with the national standard, especially with the way our current government is, but have a standard in each state where an officer has to maintain a certain level of physical fitness, like mandatory, in order to keep their job. Or if you can't make it mandatory, make it very much, put a lot of incentive behind it. Promotion points, maybe time off, maybe gifts from, from some of the local, restaurants. I'm just throwing things out there.
Yeah.
But if you increase the ability of the officer, you can stave off a lot of that nonsense. I was really confident while I was out there on the streets as a cop and working in the prison system. I had a martial arts background that dated back from when I was like 16 years old, all the way up until, even now, to be honest, and I'm retired. I'm 53 years old, but I make sure I stay in the gym even today, even though I'm not even working in that field. I still have that mindset though, as far as that protector mindset. So I stay in the gym, I keep my strength and my cardiovascular conditioning high, and make sure my hands can still work, because you never know what you may come across.
You never know when you got to give them.
You never know. You never know. So if I have that mindset and I'm retired, that's not even my job anymore. But the average officer, you put on a bulletproof vest, a duty belt that has guns, magazines, handcuffs, pepper spray, a radio. That's your everyday attire when you go to work. And to say that you have a low level, and I know we're kind of getting off topic a bit, but I try to have balanced conversations when we talk about these things, because I think that there's a lot of things that can be done on one side, but yet as far as law enforcement, as far as what law enforcement can do to minimize the need for higher levels of force, let alone the average everyday citizen. But you got people out there constantly telling people that the problem isn't you, the problem is law enforcement.
Yeah.
And they never can come together and say, hey, this is the issue here. We acknowledge we have problems. And I think most police agencies will do that, or be honest enough to say, we know we have issues. We know we have bad apples. But a lot of these so-called leaders in the Black community ain't trying to acknowledge nothing, because they know that you get a cop out there shooting somebody, that there's typically a paycheck that's behind it with a lawsuit. And a lot of agencies will just settle. They won't take it all the way through.
Yeah.
So that's another issue we're dealing with.
Yeah. And I think maybe we might have to have you back on another show, because it would be good to talk about ways in which we can improve law enforcement, not just from a training standpoint, but from a community standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. I think that can be a whole nother discussion.
Right.
For today, though, I know we wanted to get into kind of the interracial violence part.
Right.
Black on white, white on black. What is the ground truth? Because we're told a lot of things. Mo, do you want to start the video first?
Yeah, let's actually let's do the video.
Is doing the same lazy, offensive routine.
Shootings are young black men killing other young black men. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Much more than what the cops do. Why doesn't anybody talk about that? Well, I mean, why aren't there, 100 giant black celebrities who would have the respect of those people saying, what are you doing to yourselves? Why are you killing each other?
I mean, I just way to live. This dishonors our community. Come on. We're better than this.
Right. I feel like it's never addressed.
How many racist tropes?
All right, real quick. I want everyone to pay attention to what Bill Maher actually said. Mm-hmm. He said, I don't think it's addressed, but his primary focus was what? Why aren't there hundreds of black celebrities?
Yes.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind while you listen to the rest of this video. While you listen to this gentleman from MSNBC give his response. You can let it flow, please. Thank you.
How many racist tropes can you fit into one Bill Maher clip? First off, Chicago? Really? I mean, it's the predictable go-to criminal dystopia for right-wingers, but that's not the reality. Chicago isn't even in the top 10 or top 20 deadliest cities in America. It ranks below cities in red states like Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Columbus, Georgia. And yet Chicago, with its majority-minority population and its progressive...
All right. Notice the dodge here.
Mm-hmm.
While watching this video, like I said, I did my research. I took notes. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of, where do I have this here? There are 19,495 incorporated cities, towns, villages in the United States. This is per the World Population Review website. 19,000, almost 20,000. And where's Chicago listed? 28. That ain't a good place to be.
It's also misleading, though.
What's that?
It's also misleading.
Very much so, because the per capita of murders in Chicago in 2022, where he got his information, it was 18.26 murders per 100,000. So you're talking about, and if I'm not mistaken, last year they had 630 homicides. In the midst of 2,600 shootings, but yet he's deflecting and trying to make it seem like Chicago ain't that bad. That's basically what he's saying.
Because this is what it is. The reason you don't see Chicago, New York, Baltimore, the reason you don't see those cities on there because they're such large cities. Mm-hmm. So they can have a lot of murders, but their rate be really low per 100,000 because there's so many millions of people that live there, right? So that's why it's misleading to try to do this per 100,000, talking about rate, because the minute you go to cities with most murders, Chicago is number one, right? It has the most murders of any city in the country. And so it's misleading to say it's not one of the top 20 deadliest cities because they're misleading you with the data, right?
Good point.
You know, and that's why I hate this talk about rate instead of looking at actual hard numbers because this is the thing. Chicago is a large city, the third largest city in the country. But we know those murders are concentrated into certain areas. And so when you have 700 murders within a handful of neighborhoods, that is a horrible thing, right? It shows the impact of it because it's not spread out over the whole city for the most part. It's mainly South Chicago and West Chicago is where the murders typically happen.
And who's getting gunned down?
It is typically in the Black community.
Right.
Yeah.
Who's getting gunned down? So you can throw these numbers out there, like you said, the rates to deceive and to dodge and to deflect, but when you're faced with the reality of what really goes down, there's really no argument to be had. And there was another thing that he did. He said these red states. Mm-hmm. He went broader and talked about states that are red. But if you look at the local governments,
they're all blue.
The vast majority of these cities that we're talking about, what are you going to see?
Yeah.
Inner city. Yeah. Black folks, high Hispanic population in certain cities as well. Mm-hmm. But primarily, you're going to see Black folks living there in a higher percentage, especially, just like you said, when we're dealing with like Chicago, when you're dealing with South Side, when you're dealing with all the violence that goes on there. Cities like Baltimore, Maryland, cities like Philadelphia. That's what you're dealing with. And again, you see, that's why I was like, I'm going to try to restrain from raising my hand while the video is going. But there's so much distortion and there's so much intentional deception going on. It really makes me mad.
I mean, the fact that he would mention Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I mean, that's what a University of Alabama is. It is small. So you can have a handful of murders and per 100,000 be really high because it's such a low population. It's just a misleading stat.
Very much so.
You know,
it's just deception, man. They're intentionally trying to deceive. Either he's ignorant and doesn't know, or he's willfully trying to deceive people. And that's the part that really gets me upset. But I'm ready to roll. I'm ready.
Let's go. Let's move on to video.
Minority population and its progressive Black mayor-elect is the place that people like Bill Maher always want to talk about and fearmonger about. Wonder why. Second, the whole Black people killing other Black people, Black on Black crime. Are you kidding me? white people kill other white people at almost the same rate that black people kill other black people. And yet you never hear anyone complaining on TV about white-on-white crime. So these aren't points of sage wisdom from Maher. They're classic racist dog whistles. Finally, there's Maher's canard. Why don't prominent black people speak out against black violence, like, say, Maher and his guest, the black conservative economist and podcaster Glenn Loury? I feel like it's never addressed, he says in that clip. Well, aside from the typical double standards, aside from the why don't white leaders speak out against white child sex offenders or white serial killers or white domestic terrorists, it's demonstrably and offensively wrong to suggest that black public figures aren't trying to tackle or condemn gun violence. Many have done so here on this show. I mean, does Bill Maher not know any black?
Again, his main point, and we'll get into the numbers. We'll get into, trust me, we will address, because I have some more documentation where we will get into the numbers as far as black violence, black on white violence, white on black violence. We're going to get to the facts of all this.
Yeah.
But again, Bill Maher's primary emphasis was on celebrities. And look at, so I'm not going to berate this point long. Look at the people he brings up there. Like, honestly, the some of the people, I recognize one dude that he brought up. And that was the one guy, he's like a so-called reverend or pastor. He's the only one I recognize. But when he says celebrities that have the respect of these people, he's talking about people with big names. Somebody who could, like a Snoop Dogg, Beyonce, Jay-Z. Where are these people at? Why aren't they saying something? Back in our day, brother, I don't know how old you are, but back in the 80s, man, self-destruction. You had all these rappers get together and rapping about self-destruction. You talk about like Kool Moe Dee, Public Enemy, some of these youngsters who might be listening may not know who I'm talking about. Heavy D, Dougie Fresh, and these were heavyweights in the hip hop community at the time. Yeah, heavyweights in the hip hop community who came together. KRS-One came together and they made a rap telling black folks to stop killing each other.
Yep.
And then in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, on the West Coast, NWA, Hammer, even MC Hammer, Michelle A. All these people got together, basically did the same thing, saying stop killing each other. But now that's out of vogue. Now you say that, you're a sellout. Now you say that, you're talking about white points that the white man is trying to bring up. So excuse my language, but it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you're white and you don't talk about issues related to if you don't talk about issues related to race in the black community, then you don't care about black folks. But if you do bring it up, you're trying to deflect and you're trying to deflect the conversation where the conversation needs to be, which is on white supremacy. You can't win.
No, you can't. And let's be real. We finna break down and kind of destroy his whole narrative. So we know most violence is interracial, right? Mm-hmm. Because you typically the violence is going to happen towards people you're nearest, right? So most violence is interracial. But why is black on black crime brought up, but white on white crime is not? Because black on black crime is brought up because of the emphasis that is placed on white on black crime, right? And so there's this, he would say, why don't we talk about this? Why don't we talk about that? But they put so much emphasis on white on black crime, which is the way lesser of the crime data, which we're going to get into.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, why is there this outrage? Why is there these reverends? Why is there BLM? Why is there marching, protesting, burning down for the lesser and almost silence on the greater? Because black people are murdering each other at ridiculous rates in the streets, and yet there's no protest. And he's gonna talk about, stop the violence marches. 3 people and 1 news camera show up to that. Like, that is not a major event. Right. We're talking about, where are the major news stories? Where are the major celebrities? Where are people really speaking out on these issues? That's what Bill Maher is saying. Not some local chapter of Stop the Violence or Moms Against Violence. And all. We know those things exist, but they get no traction. It's not anything anybody really cares about. They don't make a difference because the people in the street that are doing the violence don't care about what they have to say. But if you had major celebrities like LeBron James, people within sports and entertainment, Jay-Z, all these come out and say, yo, look, we got to stop the violence. We got to stop murdering each other. If Black lives matter, they got to matter to us first, right? Nobody says that. And so the reason Black on Black crime is brought up is because of this hyper attention that is paid to white on Black.
Right.
And so the obvious question is, why did you get outraged at the lesser and you're almost silent at the greater?
It's
and
common
that is
sense,
what,
man.
yeah. And that is what the question, that's why Black on Black crime is brought up. If white people were constantly claiming that Black people were violent towards them and killing them, and it was this great epidemic and we need to do something, and they were marching in the streets about Black violence on whites, but then they were completely silent about the 95% of violence that happens interracially that leads to thousands of murders, we'd be like, why are you silent on this?
Right.
That question would come up. But that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the national media and Black leadership focusing on white on Black murders while basically ignoring the elephant in the room of the Chicagos, the Baltimores, the Birminghams, the East St. Louis, these places we know you don't want to go, New Orleans. Like
Right, exactly.
These cities that are just gang violence, murders. This past weekend, Memorial Day weekend was a 3-day weekend. Chicago had 53 shootings and 11 murders in one weekend. Like, there's nobody on social media talking about that. There's no Black Lives Matter. There's no the president hasn't made a statement. There's just nothing, He
knows it's taboo. He knows that's he knows that's potentially career political suicide for him. I mean, even though Joe Biden has basically been Teflon Don himself over the last 40 plus years, man can do basically whatever because he says all the right talking points.
Yes.
When he went to that Black college just a few weeks ago and,
yes,
and spoke.
I know where you're going. White supremacy is the biggest. Yes.
Bring it up. Everybody started clapping. You had some people like, man, this dude don't care about us. It sounds good and all that kind of stuff. But the vast majority of people were hung on his every word, most likely, because white supremacy, that's all you have to do to get Black folks' attention. Election season or white supremacy or reparations, or we'll take good care of you. And then we'll listen. And you see what's happening in Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Off topic slightly, but you see the emphasis was on when they were all about illegal immigration. Bring them here.
Ooh,
We're all about it. But as soon as they started seeing the impact that it had on their community, when they started taking care of these illegal people who don't have a right to be here, they, as far as the vast majority who are coming in against the law, when you have people waiting in line trying to do it the right way, who get superseded, who get overlooked, when you're dealing with that issue, and you have now these Chicagoans who voted for these politicians who support these things, now they're starting to see how it's impacting their community. Now they're starting to say, we don't know who this person is moving across the street from us. We don't know what their background is, and our kids are out there playing. Then it came home, and people start to see the reality of some of these policies. I always say, Democrats, they talk. Their main talking point is emotion and the fact that it comes across like they care. But when you see their policies come to light, it's death, destruction. Their policies are murderous. And I'm not even talking about the clear, obvious abortion issue. Their policies cause people to die, period.
Yeah. And I'll say this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it seems unrelated, but it is related. And it's related because what we're really talking about in this episode is narratives, right? And so when I saw the Chicago situation and the people, the Black, residents is just having a fit, going off at these town hall meetings, complaining about the illegal immigrants, complaining about safety concerns, all of those things. My first thought was, if this was a white audience, the media would be saying they were xenophobic, they were racist, because these people were espousing the same concerns that, let's just say, Trump supporters would say.
Right.
You know, oh, there's dangerous illegal aliens coming across the border. And they got told they were racist, they were xenophobes, they were all of this. Now, here it is. The Black community in Chicago is saying, we don't feel safe with you putting illegal immigrants in our neighborhood. And why are you giving resources to people who aren't U.S. citizens?
Right.
And I'm like, all of those people might as well be wearing MAGA hats right now.
Right.
But my issue was that, or the point is how the narrative changes based on the skin color of the people.
Mm.
And that's really what we're talking about when it comes to shootings, when it comes to violence, or whether it's illegal immigration. It is the way it is handled and the narrative that is driven and presented by it.
Right.
And that's what we want people to see and take away from this. So we can go and finish the video, and then we can kind of really get into kind of interracial violence.
Yeah, I'll stop chiming in. And another thing, when it came down to that in Chicago, your people had signs saying "build a wall."
Yes.
People had signs saying "build." Man, when I saw that, I died laughing, man. I said, people have been saying that for years, but you hit it right on the head. If that had been a white audience, man, the media would have been railing against those folks.
Yep.
Hey family, I wanted to take a minute and talk to you about Birmingham Theological Seminary. It's my seminary and it's a place that I extremely appreciate. They have small class sizes, very reasonable tuition, and professors who are committed to your education and to my education. If you are looking to extend your theological education and are considering seminary, I encourage you to check out Birmingham Theological Seminary. You can go to bts.education for more information.
All right, yeah, let's get back to the video.
Many have done so here on this show. I mean, does Bill Maher not know any black leaders? If he wants to hear from a black public figure about black violence, quote unquote, why doesn't he, I don't know, ask them? Maybe it's because he could just ask Glenn Lowry, who will tell Maher what he wants to hear. Does Maher even have access to Google, I wonder? Because black leaders have been speaking out and organizing against gun violence in their communities for years. Again, and again, and again, and again. As journalist Michael Harriot said in a Twitter thread responding to the HBO host, when black people are doing something, I never see Bill Maher there. Fox News never shows up at the Stop the Violence march. He's right. That Bill Maher thinks black people aren't addressing gun violence in their communities tells you much more about Bill Maher than it tells you about black people.
All right.
Yeah. All right. If we can get the I sent the PDF, y'all. We can pull that up. If we can, if there's an issue with that, I have some of the information written down. Based on victims' perception of the offenders to population ratio shows that the percentage of violent incidents involving black offenders was 2.1 times the percentage of black persons in the population. The percentage of violent incidents involving white offenders, 50%, was about 4/5, or like not even 1% times the percentage of whites in the population, 62%. While the percentage of violent incidents involving Hispanic offenders, 19%, was similar to the percentage of Hispanics in the population, 17%, the percentage of violent incidents involving Asian offenders, 1%, was about 1/5, or like 0.2 times the percentage of Asians in the population. Okay, let's go down to the next paragraph. The offender to victim ratio shows that the percentage of violent incidents involving black offenders, 25%, was over twice, 2.3 times the percentage of incidents committed against black victims, 11%. So when we're looking at percentage and we're not looking at rate and things like that, the truth starts to come out. And you can chime in, Kevin, anytime you want to, brother. In contrast, the percentage of incidents involving white offenders, 50%, was 4/5, 0.8. The percentage of incidents committed against whites, 62%. And we'll stop. I don't know if you want to comment.
No, let me try to explain that first paragraph in kind of a layman's term so people can understand what it's saying.
Right.
All it's saying is white people, in terms of violent crime, are underrepresented in committing violent crime. So they're 62% of the population, but they only account for 50% of violent crime.
Whereas black folks,
Blacks are 12% of the population, but yet we commit 25% of the violent crime. And so we're overly represented to our population. Hispanics about even to their population, and Asians were less than their population,
right,
in terms of the percentage of violent crime. That's really what it's saying.
And again, these numbers aren't, and this is another point I want to make. This isn't the FBI just saying these are these numbers or a bunch of cops. This information is gathered from the National Crime Victim Witness Survey. Victims and witnesses are giving their testimony, giving their information, and this is where this data is being collected from. And and as long as we continue, and we haven't even gotten to the really ugly data. This is just touching on it a little bit. The stuff that I'm about to discuss goes way deeper and is way more tragic. And this is what is often hidden from the Black community.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what.
Go ahead, bro.
Now, so I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead and get to the deeper stuff, right? Okay. Because we've been going for a minute. So let's go ahead. Let's get to this deeper stuff and let's see the ugly. I will say there's been a image going around on Twitter, is a meme, and it shows the interracial violence stats in a bar graph. And one thing that is obvious on the bar graph is that the lowest category is white on black crime. And yet in the meme, there's a television camera that is zoomed in only on the white on black category.
Yes.
And it's representative of what the news does. And so when the media focuses on that particular category, on those particular news stories, they give a false perception that is the largest category or that's what's happening all the time.
Right.
If you zoom out and look at all the categories, you will realize that white on black crime is actually the lowest of all of the interracial categories in crime.
Yeah, it's like it's not even close.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to talk about that before we got into your chart, because I think your chart's probably going to represent some of the same type of data.
Based on victims percentage, about 1.7 million violent incidents in 2019 were committed against white persons by offenders who were white. 346,260 violent incidents were committed against black persons by offenders who were black. And 334,600 violent incidents were committed against Hispanic persons by offenders who were Hispanic. There were 5.3 times, listen y'all, there were 5.3 times as many violent incidents committed by black offenders against white victims. 472,570 as were committed by white offenders against black victims. 89,980.
Yeah. So let's pause there.
We got to.
So we know there are way more white people in the country than black people. Right. So you would think that there would be more crimes of white people against black people.
If common sense, especially
you would think that if we were just saying all things are equal, but what we're seeing is the opposite. There are over 470,000 incidents of violent acts of blacks against whites, and yet only 89,000 incidents of whites against blacks. Right. But what does the media focus on? It focuses on one category, right? And that is white violence against blacks. And it gives the perception that that is what is happening more than not. And that black people, like LeBron James said, black people were being hunted down in the streets and all of this, when the reality is there's almost 4 times as many incidents of black people committing violent acts against white people. And we're only 12% of the population.
And it gets even worse than that. When you look at the vast majority of individuals committing the violent acts aren't young women. I mean, some.
No, it's predominantly
young men out there. So it's even smaller percentage of the population. And we know this ain't the majority of black folks. We know that. I mean, none of us are sitting over here saying that all black people are bad. And no, but there isn't, as long as we continue to ignore the problem, it will only get worse, because it's like a little kid who does wrong. And if you let him get away with it, and you never correct them, they only get worse. You only get progressively
This
worse.
is what I like to explain to people. We know violence is committed by a very small minority in any community, right?
Absolutely.
But when you have the Black community, you have Black culture, there's a subculture that we call street culture. And that subculture, it is what is responsible for the overrepresentation of Black people in these categories,
No doubt.
right? It is a certain culture that has a violent element to it that doesn't respect life, doesn't respect property, doesn't respect laws, and it kind of lives by its own codes of the street, per se. That subculture is what we're talking about.
No doubt.
That is the culture that needs to be addressed. And that culture is represented largely through rap music, right? So the culture that you see in rap music that's being presented, that is not predominant Black culture. That is a subculture of the Black community. And I think that's what people need to understand and realize. And so, no, this isn't, because they would say, oh, this is a racist dog whistle, right? That we're saying this, because you're not supposed to say this, even though it's true, you're not supposed to say it, because they have this insecurity that you're going to make racist, you're going to validate the claims of the white supremacists and the racists that say Black people are just violent. But that's not what we're saying. This is a very small percentage of the community that isn't even representative of what I would consider the broader Black culture. And so just to lay that out there. But to your point, and the numbers that you brought, and I've seen these numbers as well, it is about narratives. And when people allow the media narratives, we need to realize the media narrative is there to drive our emotions, to get us to behave and act in a certain way. And that is typically to get us to vote in a certain way, right? That is why, that's why Monique started this thing off saying, hey, we know election season's coming up. You're going to be hearing some of these things, right? And so I just wanted to be clear on what it is we're saying and what it is that we're not saying, because we can have these discussions without making people believe that this is somehow indicative of the Black community in general, or if you see a Black person, you need to be concerned or scared. No, that's not what it is. This is a criminal element, a violent element of the Black culture, a subculture that kind of goes unchecked. And nobody calls it out. And I think we'd be better off if we can get people, particularly true Black leaders, to step up and really call it out.
Yeah, and we look at, and again, like back to the one of my points I was making is when we look at the Black culture in general, especially I would say a greater percentage, because when we look at the high single parent home rate, when we look at the increased secularization of our society in general, it's becoming more and more popular, the Black atheists.
Yeah.
And when we're looking at the impact that has, or those two factors, I mean, we can just mention these two factors alone. An increasingly secularized society. I mean, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the impact of the sexual revolution, how that still played such a major role in our society. You know, we may not be running around preaching free love, but that's how people are acting, basically. Lay up with somebody. Back in the day, man, when I worked in the county jail, we would take inmates to court, and man, dudes would come in there and they would have their baby mama come up there and represent them or something like that in court. And the guy would stand up and he would, maybe a domestic violence case, whatever it was. He's like, yeah, my son's mom is here to, be a character witness. And the judge would be like, well, what's her name? And he said, Riri. And he said, is that her real name? He said, or what's her real name? And the dude said, I don't know.
Wow.
Man, I'm sitting up there. I just was like, I just put my head down. And when we got out in the hallway, I said, man, I said, that's just embarrassing. I said, but that demonstrates, again, this certain subculture within a small percentage of the Black community that thinks it's cool to lay up and just run the streets and not be responsible. have multiple babies with multiple mamas out there on the streets, and then these kids are raised without no true parenting, without the father figure in the home.
And it's a cycle.
And it's a continual cycle. And mom typically, in a lot of situations, the mom may feel guilty that the dad ain't there. So she kind of lets the kid do a little of the things that he wants to do.
Yep.
And you've got a kid out there ripping and running, doing whatever he wants to do. Gangs become more and more popular. And a lot of times the gang acts as a father figure type role. It
100%.
takes that role.
100%.
And those are some of the things. And as long as we can't reference these issues, and this is why I say that that Democratic policies, they give the air of compassion, but in the long run, they're deadly. They kill Black folks. Black people are the major ones who fill the graves of Democratic policies.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to give an example. It happened this week. I don't know if you saw the video of the kid on the school bus that got on to assassinate the other kid.
Yeah.
And the gun jam. So he ended up walking off. That kid was 14 years old. And he went on a school bus to assassinate another 14-year-old.
Right.
And they arrested 3 kids total.
What was that? Was that in Chicago?
I think it was. I
can't remember.
They arrested three kids, all of them like 14, 15 years old. And the one who got on the bus to actually pull the trigger, he was the one who planned it all. He was arrested for another murder as well. Check this out. He's suspected of killing the sister of one of his buddies he just got arrested with.
Wow.
So one of the guys he's running with that was in on this trying to he killed her. He killed his sister. Only that type of stuff happens in that context.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what it is, a culture that is just lost and that is just depraved, and it just doesn't respect life. Those kids were raised in a way to where that is normal behavior to them, right? And that is what we need to address. We want to address issues within the nation in terms of the Black community and what's going on with them. That is where we have to start. And that's what I want us to start focusing on, and not getting so distracted by what the media is trying to get us to look at, which isn't even the major problem when it comes to crime, when it comes to violence. It's not even close. So we're about out of time. We've talked about a lot of issues. What we like to kind of leave on some type of advice, or how do we move forward? Like, so from your perspective, what advice would you give people who are listening to this on how to move forward when these conversations come up or these news reports come up? Is there something you want them to like listen out for or look for, or what? Yeah,
like the video, when we were going through the video and I pointed out how there was a lot of deflecting going on, that's the one thing to pay attention to. Pay attention to just how the narrative is often shifted and blame is often shifted and there's almost no looking in the mirror. So just be careful of that when you're having these conversations. I would suggest that the individual, regardless of what your ethnic group you belong to, white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever it may be, don't be afraid to address these issues. Don't be afraid to bring up this data and share it and talk about it and have honest, open conversations. And don't expect to be able to solve the world's issues on social media. Have conversations. If it's a friend you're talking to, go out and have some coffee or sit down and talk to them. And always remember that these are always, when at the heart of it all, these are gospel issues.
Absolutely.
And when you look at the heart of man and know how we have a tendency to fall into sin and we naturally want to move away from the things of God, understand that if we can frame this conversation biblically, we can address these issues. And if you have someone who's on the other side of the conversation and they don't want to hear anything you have to say, sometimes you just have to let the conversation go. But don't be afraid. I say this over and over again, especially to our white brothers and sisters out there who oftentimes are afraid to talk about these issues because they're concerned about being called a racist. Even black folks who don't want to be called Uncle Tom, sellouts, whatever.
Yeah.
I get all that, man. I hear all that stuff. But I continue to talk. If we truly have compassion and love for one another, love for our brothers and sisters, then we will address these issues because we know people are dying, lives are being lost. And as long as we continue to ignore them, the problem will continue. Yeah,
I agree. And I think on that word, man, I think we'll close it out on that. I think that's a good way to end it. Eric, man, I appreciate you coming and just hanging out with us, and tell everybody like where they can find you.
Again, you can find me as Eric L. Muldrow on Facebook. I'm very active there, but on YouTube and Instagram under Code Red Conversations. I try to put out some consistent, regular content, and man, just hit me up anywhere. Those are the main places: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Code Red Conversations. Send me a message. We can talk.
All right, man. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your work, and we definitely got to have you on to have that other conversation we talked about.
Yeah, it sounds good, man. I appreciate y'all having me on.
All right, man. Appreciate it. All right, everybody. Well, if you haven't noticed, Mo's been kind of silent because she has some technical difficulties, so she's out. But on behalf of Mo and myself and the Center for Biblical Unity, we thank you all for checking us out and listening. If you'd like to support the Center for Biblical Unity, you can go to centerforbiblicalunity.com, and you can find all types of resources and also ways you can be a part and support the ministry. And so with that, we appreciate you all, and until next time.